Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. Welcome. This is Left Side of the Aisle. I'm Larry Erickson, your host. And for about a half an hour, I'm going to be talking about some stuff that I hope you'll be interested in. If you have any reactions to the show, as always, send them to me directly. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. And if you didn't catch that, go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be here a couple times during the show. And you can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather. Just know that if you do send me email to request, as always, include something in the subject line that makes it clear this is not spam, of which, like you, I get way too much, and be a little patient about getting an answer. Okay, so with that, get on with it. And this week's going to be a little bit different, but we're here. We'll get it done. Okay, first off, got to start off with a couple of quick bits of good news. I always like to when I can. First one, I really do like this. According to a newly published study in the science journal Nature, researchers at MIT and Harvard they believe that they are close to developing a treatment that would effectively cure type 1 diabetes, which is also commonly, if somewhat inaccurately, known as juvenile onset diabetes. With type 1 diabetes, your body does not produce the insulin necessary to get the glucose in your bloodstream into the cells where it's used for energy. This is as opposed to type 2 diabetes, where your body does produce insulin but can't use it properly, so there's never enough to prevent a buildup of glucose in the blood. Now, for some time, researchers have been working on a treatment that involves transplanting insulin-producing cells into the body, and this seems to work better than drugs or injections. And in 2014, a method was developed to mass-produce these kind of cells in the lab. The problem is these cells can be destroyed by the body's immune system, obviously rendering them useless. Well, this new study tested what it dubbed an invisibility cloak to, in effect, shield these cells from the body's immune system. And they said that in mice, they had it working for 6 months. They protected these cells against the immune system. Now, obviously, a lot more work needs to be done, but the researchers express optimism that between an improved cloak plus the existing ability to produce these insulin-producing cells, that the two together could, in effect, cure type 1 diabetes. And wouldn't that be good news? Next up, consumers got a bit of good news from a rather unexpected source, the United States Supreme Court. A company called Campbell Ewald had been sending out unsolicited text messages to cell phone users. Now, spamming your cell phone is illegal under federal law, and someone who receives such a message can get up to $500 in compensation for every such violation. A man named Jose Gomez was one such person. He sued. Now, what's important here, what's relevant here, is that he declared an intention to make this a class action. That is, everyone who is affected by these would be part of the suit. Thing is, just consider the cost involved in suing a corporation for a maximum return of $500. There's no way you can come out ahead on this deal, which is why class action suits, where a lot of people, who each of whom has suffered relatively small injuries, can band together as one, is the only way corporations like this often can be brought to account. The thing is that the decision as to whether or not a suit can be certified as a class action is determined later in the process, which means there is a period of time during which the defendant, Campbell Ewald in this case, knows that a class action may be coming, but only a very limited number of people, in this case just Gomez alone, is actually involved in the case. So what Campbell Ewald did was offered Gomez $1,500 for each unwanted text message, and then declared to the court that whether or not he accepted this offer, his suit had to be dismissed, because by offering him as much as he could hope to gain through his suit, the company had effectively resolved any dispute between the two. Now, if that logic was accepted by the courts, it would enable any corporation to short-circuit any possible class action suit by, in effect, simply buying off the original handful of litigants. Happily, in a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court saw through that facile argument, noting that, and I'm quoting the decision, as every first-year law student learns, the recipient's rejection of an offer leaves the matter as if no offer had ever been made. Now, especially coming from a court that has been openly hostile to class action suits. In fact, it was an earlier decision that allowed corporations to impose bans on class action on those with whom they dealt that led to the explosion of forced arbitration provisions in contracts, which I talked about last time. Especially coming from a court that has been so openly hostile to class action suits, this was rather surprising good news. Unfortunately, it's also rather tempered good news, since in that decision, the court also, and I think rather bizarrely, suggested to corporations a way that they might try to get around the decision. But truth is, at this point, we're pretty much going to have to take whatever we can get. Okay, one more bit of good news. You know about the so-called undercover videos purporting to show Planned Parenthood illegally profiting in the sale of human fetal tissue. You also note the videos put together by something called the Center for Medical Progress, which is concerned neither with medicine nor progress, have been repeatedly shown to be deceitfully edited and deliberately misleading. That is, they were as bogus and faked as the organization that put them together. And you also know, despite these videos repeatedly being shown to be tricks and lies, they still have been used to justify attacks on Planned Parenthood, with several states opening criminal investigations. Well, in one such case, Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick publicly asked the district attorney of Harris County, Texas, to open a criminal investigation into the Planned Parenthood clinic in Houston, which was one of the targets of this video fraud. It is unlikely that what he got was what he intended. After a 2-month investigation, the grand jury not only found no cause for charges against Planned Parenthood, just like every other investigation so far, it issued indictments against the 2 anti-choice fraudsters involved in making the video. They charged both with tampering with a government record, and one of them with violating a prohibition on the purchase and sale of human organs. So the phrase, "don't mess with Texas," has a somewhat different feel today. Meanwhile, Planned Parenthood itself, apparently deciding finally that it was tired of just sitting back and taking it, has sued the Center for Medical Progress, as well as a fake fetal tissue procurement company called Biomax, accusing them both of violating the RICO Act and of fraud, invasion of privacy, illegal secret recording, and trespassing. Payback. Good news. All right, now, for the rest of the show, I'm going to be covering something, and you really need to treasure this moment, because I'm going to be talking about the presidential primaries, specifically the Democratic ones. I'm not even going to worry about the copper ones. Treasure this moment. This is going to be one of the very few, and quite possibly the only time I will be talking about them. And I think it's a lot of what I say will actually be about the media, more about the media than about the candidates, although in fact a certain fundamental difference between them is one of the things that helps to drive a lot of that media coverage. But I'm going to start this by confessing my biases. Now, my political biases, I expect, would be no surprise and are known to anybody that watches this show. But what I want to talk about is personal biases. And I have to start by saying that I do not like Hillary Clinton. I don't dislike her. I just can't take to her. Now, this is a pure, unreasoned, visceral reaction. She feels too staged, too constructed to me. The moments when in interviews or on the stump, she's being cheerful or chipper or being like a good sport, like when in that last Iowa forum where she was shown Bernie Sanders' closing TV ad and said something about how it was great and poetry. At times like that, it feels like a pose. It feels like she's playing a role, like this is a character she's wearing, like Stephen Colbert did, as if she would rather come off like an intense, serious policy wonk, the way Bernie Sanders comes off, but she's learned to put on this facade because it's better politically. Now, if that's not true, if she really is the cheerful extrovert she presents herself as, if she really is, a la Hubert Humphrey, the happy warrior, then I'm seriously sorry and genuinely apologize for misreading her. But I will also say I don't think I misread her. And I'm aware that the reason she does this is because there is still so much sexism that were she as a woman to not come off as cheerful and a good sport, it would do serious damage to her candidacy. Which means she does it out of necessity. And even though I understand that, I just don't like that in a person. It's just that sense that they're putting on an act. And that, by the way, is, even though I understand why she does it, I still react to it, which is why I called it an unreasoned, visceral reaction. That said, I don't particularly like Bernie Sanders either, not personally, but for a very different reason. I have friends in Vermont who know him, or at least knew him. They, in fact, worked on several of his earlier campaigns in Burlington and for running for the House. And they told me that the way he comes off on the stump, the way he comes off in speeches and in interviews, that's genuine. That's really him. That's really the way he is. And they said he has a good sense of humor, but everything from him comes back to policy. That he really is a policy wonk. He loves talking policy. The thing is, though, they also told me that he likes to argue. That, in fact, he likes to argue so much that sometimes he would argue a point just for the sake of arguing a point. And I don't like people like that. I don't like people who argue for the sake of arguing. And I suppose some people are going to be telling me now that I'm way too particular in the kind of people that I like. But the point is, my preferences between them are based on policy, so not based on personality, because I don't particularly want to get to know either of these people. But getting to the caucuses. Right at the top, I have to say that it's absurd to say anyone won Iowa. Iowa is not an election. It's a series of caucuses to choose delegates to the Democratic National Convention. Now, you could say so-and-so got more delegates than so-and-so, but to say that they won as if this was a winner-take-all election is just nonsense. What's more, this is about as close to a draw as you could reasonably get. Clinton and Sanders are separated in the vote totals by 0.2%. And the delegate division was, by the latest account as I do this, 23 for Clinton and 21 for Sanders. And 6 of those delegates were chosen by a coin toss. And Clinton won all 6 of them, which means her margin of victory was actually based on random chance. The only way anybody wins or loses Iowa is by doing much better or much worse than was expected. On that basis, you could say that Sanders won because a couple of months ago he was 30-something points behind, and so the fact that he came so close means that he won. But the fact is that for the last couple of weeks, polls have been saying that this is really a toss-up, so that argument really doesn't fly either. The point is, this was a tie or as close as you could reasonably expect to come to one. But the media kept going on about how Clinton won Iowa. Her campaign even called it an historic win. though I'm not sure the basis for that, but I figured that was just typical campaign hyperbole, so let that pass. And in fact, the Sanders campaign did pretty much the same thing. They tried to really suggest it was actually a win for Sanders because of the size of the gap that he closed. But again, campaign hyperbole. It was the media that set the tone of Clinton won. It was just another example of the media closing ranks about the preferred candidate of the political and economic establishment. A media that first tried to ignore Sanders, then to dismiss him, then to mock him, and now, as I actually predicted to my wife, is now trying to set the bar impossibly high. Remember, first, that before Sanders announced his candidacy, and even after, Hillary Clinton was the presumptive nominee, the of course she's going to win candidate. Remember next that a poll done of Iowa caucus goers the last week of October showed Clinton with a 65 to 24 lead over Sanders, a 41 percentage point gap. And remember third that when the caucuses were held, that gap had shrunk to 1/5 of a percentage point. So how did the New York Times Upshot blog analyze the results? Quoting, "But in the end, a virtual tie in Iowa is an acceptable, if not ideal, result for Mrs. Clinton and an ominous one for Mr. Sanders." Why? Because he failed to win a state tailor-made to his strengths. Now, exactly why Iowa is tailor-made to a New England Democratic Socialist with a Brooklyn accent was unexplained beyond statements that Iowa is white and rural, just like Vermont. By which argument, I suppose, states like Idaho and Montana are also tailor-made for Bernie Sanders. The point is, the standard here went from he can't win to he must win or else. And just how bad did the coverage of Sanders get? Consider this. A couple of days before the caucuses, BuzzFeed reported that the Clinton campaign was actively training its volunteers in Iowa in a maneuver that could take delegates away from Sanders by making Martin O'Malley a viable candidate in certain precincts. Now, this was confirmed to BuzzFeed by a Clinton precinct captain. Now, I'm not going to get into the hows, but suffice it to say that it's a maneuver. It's kind of sneaky, but it is within the rules. It doesn't break any rules. In response to this, a site called vocative.com put out an article headlined, quote, "Sanders supporters advocate using O'Malley as a spoiler in Iowa," subheaded, "Bernie Sanders' campaign slammed Hillary Clinton's planned use of a political tactic, but his supporters are advocating the same strategy." If you get to the third paragraphs of the story, you discover that what happened was that Vocative's deep web analysts, and yes, that's exactly what they were called in the article, their deep web analysts, had discovered some Sanders supporters on a subreddit proposing this idea. Not Sanders, not the campaign, not any official of the campaign, not anyone directly connected to the campaign, a handful of supporters. By the time that article got to the splash screen of AOL.com, the headline had become, "Sanders accused of dirty trick against Clinton," with the subhead that it has emerged that Bernie Sanders' camp may be trying to rob Hillary Clinton of supporters with a sneaky move. In other words, a tactic which the Clinton campaign was teaching to its supporters has now morphed into a dirty trick being played by Sanders. Now, while that is perhaps an egregious example, it's far from the only one, demonstrating a mass media bias that, having failed to kill the Sanders campaign with silence, would now attempt to kill it by setting impossibly high standards of achievement and political purity. Now, the thing is, I am not talking, just make clear, I am not talking about secret media cabals here. I'm not talking about grand conspiracies here. I'm talking about the natural outgrowth of a shared worldview, a common way of looking at the world, a commonality of perspective, and so a commonality of conclusion and a commonality of response. I'll say it again, the media is closing ranks around the preferred candidate of the political and economic establishment. The candidate that, even though they might not be crazy about their views, is still the candidate which that establishment feels comfortable with, is convinced that they might rearrange some of the apples on the cart, but they won't upset the whole thing. And that candidate clearly is Hillary Clinton. Because Hillary Clinton, bluntly, is not nearly as progressive as she has been painting herself recently with her sudden and much too convenient conversion to populism, a commitment that is increased in direct proportion to the shrinking of the gap between her and Sanders. In fact, it is not hard to explain why it's not hard to make a case, all right, let me put it this way. It's not hard to make a case for why anyone who would consider themselves progressive should not vote for Hillary Clinton. And I will get to that right after the break. All right, and we're back. Now, I said it's not hard to make a case for why those who consider themselves progressive should not vote for Hillary Clinton. This is first beyond the fact that her recent conversion to populism can't really be trusted. The last day of the Iowa campaign, she was on the stump saying, "I'm a progressive," but the very next day, during a disturbingly fawning interview with Chris Matthews, she said, "We've got to get back to the middle. We've got to get back to the big center." But, okay, here's the thing. For one thing, she's far more hawkish than most people realize. Back in 2011, as Secretary of State, she was one of the biggest voices pushing about the bombing of Libya, and actually went so far as to tell a congressional hearing that the Obama administration would simply ignore any attempts by Congress to exercise its constitutional authority on matters of war and peace. She's also been an enthusiastic supporter of the drone war that has killed thousands of civilians. In 2014, after leaving the administration, she declared a policy position on Iran's nuclear program, which, had it been adopted, would have undermined the agreement that was actually reached. And she's bemoaned the fact the U.S. has not been more involved in Syria, including creating a credible fighting force. And she has advocated a no-fly zone and a safe zone in Syria, the latter of which, despite her flippant denials during a recent debate, would require ground troops. Just recently on Meet the Press, she declared that her policy on Iran would be distrust and verify. She's sounding more like a member of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet than a candidate for president of the United States. She proposed new sanctions on Iran over a claim about violating UN Security Council resolutions on its ballistic missile program. And at least she's consistent on this. During the 2008 primary, she called Barack Obama naive for saying he'd be willing to talk to the Iranians. In Congress, she supported both the Patriot Act, the one that I dubbed the Traitor Act for its impact on civil liberties, and its reauthorization. She has more recently defended NSA spying and called Edward Snowden an enabler of terrorism, and said she was puzzled as to why he fled the country when we have all these protections for whistleblowers. Apparently forgetting that the Obama administration has prosecuted more whistleblowers than all previous presidents combined. On the economy, suffice it to say that, as I said last time, she has so many ties to Wall Street it looks like some kind of kinky bondage party. Enough, in fact, that they are so comfortable with her that Tom Donahue, president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, said just recently that the only reason Clinton has come out against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that huge trade deal, is because Sanders has, and that if she's elected, she'll switch back to supporting what the pact she once called the gold standard for trade deals, before she started to waffle about support in the face of its great unpopularity with primary voters. Until she was challenged by Sanders' campaign, she supported fracking. For months, she avoided taking a stand in the Keystone XL pipeline, only to finally come out in opposition, not on the grounds it was a bad idea, but that it was a distraction. There's more, but there's enough to make the point that, yes, a case can be made that Hillary Clinton does not deserve the support of progressives. Here's the sad part. Even given all of that and all the things that I didn't go through, she is still light years ahead, light years beyond anybody on the Gopper side. So much so that were she to be the nominee and I lived in a toss-up state, which I certainly do not, but if I did and that was true, I'd have to seriously consider choking back my bile and voting for her. I'm hoping I won't have to make that choice. I do have problems with Bernie Sanders. His rather fumbling defenses of his weak record on gun control disturbed me, and the fact he seems to lack, for lack of a better term, a feel for issues of racial and sexual justice, particularly when those cannot be easily connected to a class economic analysis. It's not to say he's bad in those issues. In fact, he's got a good record on them. But when he talks about the billionaire class running the economy, when he talks about economic inequality, when he talks about his political revolution, you can tell that he feels this. This is not just analysis. This is passion. This is commitment. This is emotion. And he just doesn't seem to have that same feel for issues of racial and sexual justice. And lacking that sort of emotional connection, it's too easy for issues like that to keep slipping down the list of priorities, to forever be in the inbox without ever actually getting to the desk. And that worries me. It does. On the economy, he's not the socialist he claims to be, and even less the one he's often painted to be. I like a lot of his proposals, but I think a lot of them don't go far enough. But ultimately, in the bottom line, this is what it comes down to me. A while ago, there was a brief kerfuffle when Sanders was asked about the fact that Planned Parenthood and the Human Rights Campaign had endorsed Clinton, the latter of which was especially odd considering that he has a 100% voting record with them. But he responded by referring to them as part of the establishment. Now, he quickly backed off that, realizing it was a gaffe, but while it may have been a gaffe, it wasn't untrue, because I really think he was talking about the national boards of these organizations, which are largely devoted to inside the Beltway congressional lobbying. But this actually is what raises an important difference for me. First things first, Hillary Clinton is a former senator, a former secretary of state who now makes lots of money giving speeches to corporate gatherings. He is a sitting U.S. senator, a former member of the House of Representatives, with something like a 33-year history in elective office, 25 of those at the federal level. These people are both members of the establishment. But here's the difference, and it's a fundamental one. She sees that establishment as what you have to work within, and which sets the boundaries of the possible. He sees that establishment as what you have to go beyond in order to bring pressure to make that establishment do things it would otherwise not have done. All of which brings to mind a 60s slogan: be realistic, demand the impossible. Because that is the only way true progress has ever come about. And personally, I prefer to go with the hope of progress. If our society were to be likened to a house with a leaky roof, Bernie Sanders would be the one who's going, I know it's hard, I know it's tough, but we've got to fix the roof. While Hillary Clinton will be the one to advocate putting flower pots under the drips in order to beautify the house. He is the voice for hope for real progress, and she is ultimately the voice of the hope that things will get worse a little more slowly. Which is why I am seriously considering registering as a Democrat just so I can vote in my home state's primary for Bernie Sanders. That's it for this week. We will be back next week. In the meantime, you just go ahead. You have the best week you possibly can. Remember, you can reach me at huviani@AOL.com. But for now, again, have the best week you possibly can. As always, peace.